Black Janitor noticed symptoms everyone else ignored and ended up saving the life of a millionaire CEO. The executive elevator at the Atlanta Business Tower had never stopped on the 32nd floor at 4 in the morning. But there stood Mr. James Washington, a night custodian for 18 years, watching through the polished glass of the CEO's office as a woman collapsed onto a desk made of solid mahogany. Miss Amelia Vance, CEO of Vance Industries and one of the most influential women in the country, was clearly in trouble. Her face was a mask of pain. Her right arm hung limply, and when she tried to speak into her phone, her words came out slurred and unintelligible. James recognized the signs immediately. A stroke in progress. At 65, he had learned medicine the hard way. His late wife, Dorothy, had been a nurse specializing in cardiology for 30 years before she passed away from a sudden illness 7 years ago. During their decades together, she had turned every family dinner into an impromptu lesson on emergency medicine, insisting that medical knowledge could save lives, regardless of a person's status. James hesitated for just a second. He was the invisible man, a black man who cleaned the offices after the powerful left. Miss Amelia Vance was a woman whose face was on every business magazine, a white woman who moved billions with a single email. Their worlds never crossed, save for the rare hallway encounter where she didn't even see him. But Dorothy's voice echoed in his mind. Neurological symptoms didn't respect social class or race. James opened the door to the office. Miss Vance, you are having a stroke. Don't try to talk. Just listen to me. His voice, though soft, carried the calm authority of someone who had watched Dorothy guide families through medical crises for decades. Amelia tried to protest, but her words came out even more garbled. Panic began to take hold in her eyes as she realized something was terribly wrong. James was already dialing 911 as he carefully positioned Amelia to prevent further neurological damage. Ambulance to the Atlanta Business Tower, 32nd floor. Female patient, mid-50s, presenting with classic stroke symptoms, facial drooping, weakness in the right arm, slurred speech. Symptoms began approximately 5 minutes ago. The emergency operator was stunned by the medical accuracy of a man who identified himself as a custodian, but James continued to provide clinical information with the ease of a professional. When the paramedics arrived, they found Amelia stabilized in the correct position, with James providing a detailed account of her symptoms. One of the paramedics whispered to his colleague, "This guy knows more about neurology than half the interns I know." At the hospital, while Amelia received the treatment that would save her life, James returned to work as if nothing had happened. After all, he was just the night custodian, the invisible man who kept the building running while the powerful slept. What James didn't know was that this night would change his life in ways Dorothy couldn't have predicted, and what Miss Amelia Vance would discover about prejudice, medicine, and the true meaning of competence would rewrite everything she thought she knew about human value. The next morning, James arrived at work, expecting life to return to normal, but he found an unpleasant surprise waiting for him in the employee locker room. A formal warning note on his locker. Inappropriate use of the executive elevator during work hours. Unauthorized access to corporate facilities after hours. The signature belonged to Mr. Wilson Carter, a black man who was the security manager and the kind of man who measured his own worth by his power to make other people's lives miserable. James folded the paper calmly. 18 years of impeccable work, never a complaint. And now he was being punished for saving the CEO's life. The irony was not lost on him. In the corporate world, even doing the right thing could be turned into a crime if you were the wrong man doing it. What really bothered James wasn't the warning itself, but the timing. How did Wilson find out about the previous night's events so quickly? The hospital maintained medical confidentiality, and the paramedics had no reason to report details to the company. Someone was watching Miss Amelia Vance's movements very closely. During his morning shift, James discreetly observed the movement on the 31st floor. Dr. Martin Cole, a black man who was Amelia's personal physician, arrived 2 hours later than usual with an expression that mixed irritation and genuine panic. Through the glass doors, James saw a heated discussion between the doctor and Mr. Wilson Carter. Dorothy's memory came back to him like a blow. "James," she used to say when they reviewed complex cases over dinner, "when neurological symptoms appear suddenly in stressed executives, the first question should never be, 'Why now?' but rather, 'Who benefits if this person can no longer work?'" James had assumed that Amelia's stroke was the result of stress and corporate pressure, but the tense conversation between Wilson and Dr. Cole planted a seed of doubt that Dorothy would have recognized immediately. Competent doctors didn't panic when patients survived medical emergencies. They celebrated. That afternoon, James received an unexpected call. Miss Amelia Vance wanted to see him in her office. When he arrived on the 32nd floor, he found the CEO looking much better, but with an inquiring look that had not been present the night before. "Mr. Washington, correct?" Amelia gestured for him to sit in the chair across from her desk. "I want to thank you personally for what you did last night. The doctor said your quick actions saved my life." "I only did what any decent person would do, Miss Vance." Amelia studied his face with growing interest. "The paramedics were impressed with your medical knowledge. Where did you learn about neurological symptoms?" James hesitated. Talking about Dorothy always hurt, but there was something in Amelia's expression that suggested the question wasn't just polite. "My wife was a nurse specializing in cardiology. 30 years at Atlanta General Hospital. She taught me how to recognize emergency signs. She died 7 years ago." Amelia's expression softened genuinely. "I'm sorry for your loss." She paused, as if weighing her next words carefully. "Mr. Washington, can I ask you a strange question? In your informal medical opinion, did my symptoms yesterday seem natural?" The question caught James off guard. Miss Amelia Vance, one of the most powerful women in the country, was asking a black custodian for his medical opinion on her own condition. Even more intriguing, she was phrasing the question as if she suspected something wasn't right. "With all due respect, Miss Vance, this is something you should discuss with your personal physician." "I have." Her response came too quickly, laden with barely concealed frustration. Dr. Cole said it was executive stress. He prescribed sedatives and recommended a vacation. James felt a familiar chill. Dorothy always said that competent doctors investigated the causes of strokes in young patients as if their lives depended on it. Because they did. Prescribing sedatives to someone who had just had a neurological event was not only inappropriate, it was potentially criminal. "Miss Vance," James said carefully, "did your husband ever mention similar symptoms before yesterday?" Amelia froze. "How did you?" "A stroke in a person in their 50s rarely happens out of the blue. There are usually warning signs that go unnoticed or are misinterpreted." Silence stretched between them as Amelia processed the implication. Finally, she nodded slowly. Persistent headaches, occasional dizziness, episodes of mental confusion that Dr. Cole attributed to work pressure. James kept his expression neutral, but internally, Dorothy's alarms were screaming. Any competent neurologist would have ordered detailed tests in light of those symptoms. The fact that Dr. Cole had ignored them meant one of two things: gross medical incompetence or something deliberately sinister. When James left Amelia's office 15 minutes later, Mr. Wilson Carter was waiting in the hallway, making a point of being seen observing the meeting. The smile he directed at James contained a thinly veiled threat, as if to say, "We know you're meddling where you shouldn't be." That night, as James cleaned up the empty offices, something Dorothy always insisted on echoed in his mind. "James, there are no coincidences in medicine. When strange patterns appear, there's always someone behind them creating those patterns. What if Miss Amelia Vance hadn't simply had a stress-induced stroke? What if someone was deliberately putting her health at risk? James thought about the warning in his locker, the argument between Wilson and Dr. Cole, and the way they both seemed to know too much about events that should have been confidential. For 18 years, James had been the invisible man, the black custodian no one noticed. But invisibility, he was beginning to realize, could be the most powerful weapon against people who thought themselves untouchable, especially when those people completely underestimated what a simple man was capable of observing, understanding, and, if necessary, exposing. James spent the next 2 weeks doing something that 18 years of night work had taught him perfectly: being completely invisible while observing everything. What he discovered confirmed his worst fears about Miss Amelia Vance's situation. Dr. Martin Cole visited Mr. Wilson Carter's office 3 times a week, always carrying a brown medical briefcase that was never allowed to leave the office. During one of these visits, James accidentally left his cleaning cart too close to the half-open door and overheard fragments of a conversation that made his blood run cold. "The tests continue to show progressive cardiovascular deterioration," whispered Dr. Cole. "But I'm keeping the official reports within normal parameters, as agreed." "Perfect," replied Wilson. "How much longer do you estimate?" "With the medication I'm prescribing, disguised as health supplements, I'd say we have another 6 months before the next serious episode, and that will probably be definitive." James had to lean on the cart to keep from staggering. They weren't just neglecting Amelia's health. They were actively poisoning her. Dorothy had always said that the worst kind of medical crime was one committed by someone who had sworn to protect lives. The missing piece of the puzzle came unexpectedly via Mr. Marcus Johnson, a black man who was the air conditioning maintenance technician who worked in the offices during the day. Marcus was 10 years younger than James, a former military electronics expert who now supported 2 children with contract jobs. "Man, you have to see this," Marcus whispered to James during a shift change on a Friday. "I was installing new filters on the 32nd floor when I overheard Wilson on the phone. He was talking about Vance Industry stock, something about buying large quantities before a leadership change he knew was coming." James felt the pieces fall into place. Mr. Wilson Carter wasn't just an accomplice. He was the architect of the entire conspiracy. If Amelia died or was incapacitated, as senior security manager and a member of the emergency board, Wilson would temporarily take over the company's operations. With inside information about the leadership change, he could manipulate the stock market to make millions. "Marcus," James said carefully, "do you still have contacts in the Army? People who understand documentation and evidence?" Marcus studied James's face with the keen perception of someone who had served in combat zones. "Depending on what you need. Maybe." "Why?" James made a decision that would change everything. Over the next 2 hours, he told Marcus the whole story: Amelia's stroke, the medical conspiracy, Wilson's plans, his suspicions of gradual poisoning. Marcus listened quietly, asking precise questions that betrayed his military-trained intelligence. "That's attempted murder combined with large-scale financial fraud," Marcus said finally. "But proving it is going to be tricky. Do you have any hard evidence?" "Not yet, but I know where to get it." The plan they devised was risky but elegant in its simplicity. Marcus would use his authorized access to the building systems to discreetly install recording equipment in Wilson and Dr. Cole's offices. James, with his knowledge of schedules and routines, would coordinate the operation during the weekends when security was minimal. "One thing bothers me," Marcus said as they reviewed the blueprints of the ventilation system. "Why didn't they just fire you after the warning? A guy who saves the CEO's life should be a hero, not someone being hounded." James had thought the same thing. Why fire the hero right after he saves the boss? Better to keep the custodian invisible where they can keep an eye on him. "They think I'm just an ignorant employee who got lucky recognizing the symptoms of a stroke." Wilson and Dr. Cole's arrogance was impressive. During their conversations, which James was able to partially overhear, they spoke openly about him as the lucky custodian who wasn't educated enough to understand what had really happened. They even laughed about how James had gotten himself into something he shouldn't have, but was too smart to keep causing trouble. They couldn't have been more wrong. The first test of the plan took place on a Monday night. While James meticulously cleaned the 32nd floor, Marcus worked silently in the ventilation ducts, installing microphones and microscopic cameras in the target offices. Marcus's military operation was impressive. In 45 minutes, he had established a surveillance network that a private detective would have taken weeks to set up. "Ready," Marcus said through the discreet communicator they had purchased. Now we just wait for them to hang themselves with their own words. They didn't have to wait long. The following Wednesday, Wilson and Dr. Cole had a meeting that was recorded in its entirety. The content was even worse than James had imagined. Not only did they confirm Amelia's gradual poisoning, but they discussed in detail how to increase the dosage to speed up the process. "The press will love this story," Wilson laughed. "Young, successful CEO, tragically killed by executive stress. It will cause a national uproar about mental health in the corporate environment. A perfect smokescreen for the leadership transition." James listened to the recording 3 times, each playback increasing his determination. Dorothy always said that knowledge without action was complicity. It was time to act. What Wilson and Dr. Cole didn't know was that his words had just signed his own death warrant. And the ignorant custodian they had underestimated was about to prove that true intelligence didn't come from degrees or social status, but from a combination of knowledge, determination, and the most dangerous weapon of all, the absolute certainty of being on the right side of justice. As he meticulously organized the evidence that would destroy them both, James smiled for the first time in weeks. Dorothy would be proud. His medical knowledge had not only saved a life, but he was about to expose a conspiracy that would shock the corporate world. The medicine she had taught him was being used not only to heal, but to deliver justice in a way no court could ignore. The following Wednesday would be remembered as the day arrogance met its final price. The following Wednesday, James arrived at work carrying something Wilson and Dr. Cole would never suspect. 3 flash drives containing 92 hours of recordings, 15 scanned fake medical documents, and financial evidence that a former military accountant had methodically compiled. Marcus had done more than install surveillance equipment. His Army contacts included financial crime experts who had analyzed Wilson's stock buying patterns with the precision of a military intelligence operation. The result was devastating. 341 suspicious transactions, all timed perfectly with Amelia's medical episodes. But James had a plan that went beyond simply handing the evidence over to the authorities. Wilson and Dr. Cole needed to understand that they had underestimated the wrong man in the most humiliating way possible. The first phase began during the monthly Vance Industries Executive Board meeting. Miss Amelia, still recovering and taking the supplements prescribed by Dr. Cole, presided over the table as 15 executives discussed quarterly reports. Wilson occupied his usual position to her right, radiating the confidence of someone who believed he held the future in his hands. James entered the conference room with his cleaning cart, as he had done hundreds of times before, but this time, as he discreetly emptied the trash cans, he left a sealed envelope on Amelia's stack of documents. When she opened it, she found a single typed line. "The supplements you're taking are not supplements. Check the bottle. Someone who cares." Amelia's expression changed subtly, but Wilson was too busy presenting financial projections to notice. James watched from afar as she surreptitiously examined the bottle of supplements she always carried in her purse. 18 years of being invisible had taught him to read facial expressions with surgical precision. Amelia had just realized that something was fundamentally wrong. The second phase came 2 hours later, When Dr. Martin Cole arrived for his weekly routine consultation with Amelia, he couldn't have known that James had installed a directional microphone in the office lamp, or that Marcus was recording everything from a van parked across the street. "How are your stress symptoms, Amelia?" Dr. Cole asked with the false solicitude James had learned to despise. "Have you been taking your supplements as directed?" "Religiously," Amelia replied, but her voice carried a note of suspicion that made the doctor shift uncomfortably in his chair. "Actually, doctor, I'm considering a second medical opinion, just to make sure we're getting the best treatment possible." James saw a panic flash across Dr. Cole's face through the microscopic camera Marcus had installed. "That's completely unnecessary, Amelia. Your tests show steady improvement. A second opinion could confuse the treatment." "And how curious." Amelia interrupted, opening a drawer in the desk. "Because I received this today." She produced the envelope James had left, along with a bottle of supplements. "Someone suggests that these are not supplements. What would you say if I sent them for independent laboratory analysis?" Dr. Cole paled visibly. "Amelia, you can't take an anonymous note seriously. This is clearly an attempt to sabotage your medical treatment. Some disgruntled employee trying to cause trouble." "Then you wouldn't mind if I had them tested?" The question was phrased with the precision of someone accustomed to high-stakes corporate negotiations. Well, of course I wouldn't mind, but it's a waste of time and resources. I can assure you that." Amelia raised her hand, silencing him. "Dr. Cole, in 20 years as a CEO, I've learned that when someone tries to dissuade me from checking something, that's exactly when I need to check it." The third phase was executed with military precision. While Dr. Cole tried to convince Amelia not to test the supplements, Marcus was delivering complete copies of all the evidence to the Atlanta Police Department, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the American Medical Association, and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution newspaper. James had insisted that Amelia know the truth before the story went public. She deserved the dignity of fully understanding how her life had been manipulated before the whole world knew. So on Friday at 5:00 in the afternoon, James knocked on Amelia's office door carrying a briefcase that would change everything. "May I come in, Mrs. Sterling? There's something important you need to know." Amelia looked up immediately, recognizing the custodian who had saved her life twice. "Of course, Mr. Washington. In fact, I want to thank you again, and I also want to know how you knew about the supplements." James placed the briefcase on the desk with solemn ceremony. "Miss Vance, what I'm about to show you will shock you, but you need to know before the press publishes the story tomorrow morning." Over the next 45 minutes, James methodically presented each piece of evidence: the recordings of Wilson and Dr. Cole discussing the gradual poisoning, the falsified medical documents, and the financial transactions proving that Wilson had been manipulating the stock market based on her planned deterioration in health. Amelia listened in growing silence, her expression shifting from surprise to horror and finally to a cold anger that James recognized as the controlled fury of someone accustomed to wielding power. "They thought I was just an ignorant custodian," James said when he finished. "Someone who had been lucky enough to recognize the symptoms of a stroke, but wasn't educated enough to understand what was really going on." "And you figured it all out," Amelia murmured, studying the evidence with the attention she would have devoted to a billion-dollar corporate merger. "Mr. Washington, you saved my life 3 times, twice from medical emergencies and once from a conspiracy." What happened next exceeded even James's expectations for revenge. Miss Amelia Vance wasn't just a successful CEO. She was a corporate strategist who had built an empire by dealing with people who tried to betray her. On Saturday morning, when Wilson arrived at the office for an emergency meeting Amelia had called, he found not only her waiting, but also police officers, representatives from the Securities and Exchange Commission, and an investigator from the American Medical Association. "Wilson," Amelia said with the coldness of someone about to fire an incompetent employee, "I'd like to introduce you to some people who are very interested in your extracurricular activities." Wilson tried to maintain his composure, but James, watching from afar through the security cameras Marcus had hacked, saw the exact moment when arrogance turned to panic. "Amelia, what's going on here? If this is about some ridiculous accusation." "Accusation?" Amelia smiled without humor. "Wilson, they're not here to hear accusations. They're here to make arrests based on solid evidence of attempted murder, financial fraud, and market manipulation." Special Agent Davis began reading Wilson his rights as he protested his innocence with the desperation of someone who finally realized his game was up. Dr. Cole was arrested simultaneously at his office, handcuffs being placed on him as he tried to delete files from his computer. The fourth and final phase was the most satisfying. On Monday, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution published the full story on its front page. Black custodian hero exposes plot to murder. Millionaire CEO, James's narrative. A working-class black man using medical knowledge inherited from his wife to save the life of a white female executive, then exposing a complex corporate conspiracy, captured the national imagination. But the real coup de grace came when Amelia called a press conference in front of dozens of cameras. She not only validated every detail of James's story, but announced his immediate promotion to Director of Corporate Safety and Integrity at Vance Industries with a salary of $200,000 a year. "Mr. James Washington," she said to the cameras, "has proven that competence, integrity, and intelligence don't depend on degrees or social status. They depend on character, and he has character in spades." Wilson and Dr. Cole watched the press conference from prison, realizing that they had been defeated not only legally, but publicly humiliated by the ignorant custodian they thought they could manipulate indefinitely. The final irony was perfect. While Wilson faced 25 years in prison for attempted murder and financial fraud, and Dr. Cole lost his medical license and faced 15 years in jail, James was being celebrated nationally as a hero who proved that true intelligence comes from a heart, not a bank account. Dorothy would have been proud. His medical knowledge had not only saved a life, but he was about to expose corruption that could have destroyed many others. And the man she had loved was finally getting the recognition he had always deserved, proving that sometimes justice not only triumphs, it does so in a spectacularly satisfying fashion.